All right, starting. Well, I'm glad I got this opportunity to study with you today. I'm glad you came to our church last week and wanted to learn more.
It was a good time. I like your church.
All right.
I want to be a part of your women's group.
I'm so excited about that. So we are going to get you caught up and ready to join the group with us next Wednesday because we've already met a couple times. And if you jumped in now, you might be a little lost.
Okay.
So we're going to go over just some of the last things that we talked about so that you'll be on the same page as everyone else. But just before we get started, what made you decide to come visit our church?
Well, I just moved here for college, and I figured I might need a church home, so I came to your church. And I went to a couple other churches, but yours was the most welcoming.
That's good. I'm very glad to hear that. All right. So what we've done in our study so far is talk about how we got the Bible that we have today. So how this came to be in our hands and so widely distributed across the world. Because I'm pretty sure this is one of the books that has been printed into the most languages and published the most times,
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty interesting to think about how it came from God and got to us. So I have a little bit of a chart here. So I just kind of want to hear your thoughts on how you think this came to be right here.
Well, I'm relatively new to Christianity, so I don't know a whole lot, but I mean, I know that Moses had the 10 Commandments at one point, so maybe he just kind of wrote those down.
Those are in here for sure.
Well, I mean, I figured that God was just like, hey, I want you to write this down because I want everyone to know about this. Mm-hmm. So maybe it's something like that.
Mm-hmm. That's a good core belief of that it really came from God. And we're going to build upon that because you're not wrong. It's very much something that a lot of it came from God, but maybe not quite in the, hey, write this down while I talk. But kind of, almost. So I have a little chart here, which I don't know. Tony, do you have something to write with? By any chance? So the chart starts with, thank you. All right. So it starts with God reveals. So this is God revealed his word and his teachings to us humans.
Did he speak his teachings, or did he have? Because I know in the Bible there's stories of him speaking through winds and storms and stuff. So is this back when he actually did speak to people?
He did kind of a little bit of both. There are times with Moses where he spoke through nature or sounds, or then there were times that he spoke through people and times that he spoke just directly to people and they kind of heard his voice. Okay. But it wasn't assisted by the wind like you're thinking of, or the burning bush with Moses. So this is just him kind of giving it to us. So we're going to start with God reveals. And there is an image here for that. So you see this kind of this thought bubble. Mm-hmm. That's just conveying that it's coming from God. He's revealing his thoughts. And this occurs before the Bible was written. So this isn't he reveals and it was on paper. This is just him giving it to people. And then we have it's inspired word that was given to men, and that is where we have it written down.
Okay.
Okay, so man records that inspired word that came from God.
Okay.
So inspired man records. So he writes down for the first time those inspired words that came from God. And a lot of those we can see in the form of letters, and those are things that were inspired by God but were written by people to other people. Okay. Like we have in the John and some of those, or Peter, where he was writing to different people into churches, versus Genesis, which was written by someone at a different point in time.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Gotcha. So this was over like a wide period of time.
Yeah. So it was inspired in different ways.
Gotcha.
So, and that's where we have just our first text. So our next point is men copies. So they had this inspired word, but they didn't have printing presses and things like we have now where they could just print it off and go. They had one.
Gotcha.
And then so they had to copy it and copy it and copy it to be able to spread it and for other people to read it. So then we had men copy. So you see in this image we have copies of the same thing just over and over again. And some of them they look a little different because, they were copying different parts of it and spreading it to people who didn't have it yet. Because how do you spread the word if nobody can read it?
That's fair.
And then we have our next part is men compiles. So they had all of these parts all over the world, and they had to bring them together so that, because if you were in Rome, you might have only seen small bits of the Bible where it was. But once they compiled it, then you had more of what we think of as our Bible, where it's all together in one place, instead of having to have 66 different little books. That would make it a little harder for you to sit down and study.
A little bit.
So you see how that comes down. It goes from the 6 back into one book.
Gotcha.
So that is men compiles. And what do you think? Do you have any guesses as to what our next step would be? What do we do after we have that? We talked a little bit about it before with this being printed so many times.
Well, you were talking about how can you read it if it's not in your language? So maybe you have to put it into other languages?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. So men translates. So we had to translate it.
Yeah,
exactly. So, and as you can see in the diagram, we have so many different languages. And there are hundreds and hundreds of languages in the world that are spoken. And we don't want only Christians who speak English or only speak Spanish. We want everyone to be able to receive the word. So the last one is that men translates and makes it accessible to every language.
That's interesting. I mean, it'd be kind of hard to translate the entire Bible.
It really
take
would.
a long time.
All right, men translates. So there's quite a few steps that have occurred to have us have our Bible. It's a lot. So going back to the beginning, so we have our God reveals, inspired, man records, men copy, men compiles, and men translate. So we're going to work through these steps a little bit and have a little bit of better understanding of really where it came from. So in this beginning part, so where we talk about God reveals, we talked a little bit about how that happened. And so part of how that happened, some of the different ways, so God dictated, and that is just speaking the laws that are in the Old Testament, towards the front of our Bible, all of those Old Testament laws. Well, yeah, it's Old Testament. Yeah.
Okay.
Because old is at the beginning.
Gotcha.
And new is at the end.
I think that's correct.
The old here. This has a lot of laws in it.
Okay.
That applied to Christians when this was written.
Gotcha.
And so that is what God dictated. A lot of those laws to Moses. He spoke to him. Moses got a lot of FaceTime with Jesus and God.
That'd be cool.
So then Daniel got much of his revelations from dreams. So that was God spoke to Daniel more in dreams than he did in actual speaking to him. And then Peter, one of the ways that God communicated with him was more visions. So he would have these visions. So they're not dreams while he was asleep at night. But he would just have these visions of what God was trying to tell him. Yeah, kind of. Yes, so you're in a moment and then you're imagining something else, but it's not you imagining it. So it's very similar to that. Good reference to your culture. So we're going to look at a couple scriptures. If you would like to find 2 Timothy 3:16.
Oh man, Old Testament.
I think it's New Testament.
It's Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges. What would you say?
2 Timothy.
First and Chronicles. That's all first. Okay.
That's totally
But
gonna be more
that's all the
like
first and second, so it's gotta be in the New Testament, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's after Acts. It's gonna be after Acts.
This is why I want to join the church, because I can't find the books of the Bible.
You know what? We have some kids in our youth group who could show you a song that they have that, which I heard you humming it a little bit there.
I learned it as a kid, but I don't remember.
They
it
are
very
some
well.
experts on the books of the Bible.
It's on 2
Good
Timothy.
job. 2 Timothy 3:16. So if you
Okay.
could read that to us.
Okay.
Let's check. Okay. You're good. You're good.
All scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness. Wow. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Does that kind of relate to what we've been talking about?
Mm-hmm.
So it's all from God. There's no part of it that is just someone made it up and thought it would be fit well in the Bible.
Even the stories and parables and stuff?
Even those were either told, a lot of those were told by Jesus himself as a way of teaching.
Gotcha.
So a lot of the stories that we are like, that didn't happen, or they either did happen or they were a tool for teaching something important. All right, so another one that we could look at would be 1 Corinthians 2:13. It's really similar. It's really close to Timothy.
Okay.
Oops, there it is. Perfect. Oh, you missed it?
Yeah, just a little. What was it?
It was 1 Corinthians 2:13.
Okay. This is what we speak, not in words taught us by human wisdom, but in words taught by the Spirit, expressing spiritual truths in spiritual words. That's interesting.
What do you think that means?
What
does that say to you?
Well, it's not our words, but it's taught by the Spirit, so I'm guessing that's just reiterating the point of that it's not ours. Like,
so it didn't come from within us. We didn't create it, but it
Mm-hmm.
came from somewhere more powerful.
Yeah, that's a cool verse.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
I like it.
All right, so we have a lot of, well, we actually no longer have any of the original manuscripts. So the original 1 Corinthians that was written, we no longer have those. And those were actually, this is an interesting fact, those are called autographs. Our very first manuscripts, the originals that were written by the authors of each of our books, were called autographs, which I think is really interesting.
Is that what we call autographs, like our original handwriting? Like,
you know what, it might be.
That's interesting.
It is really interesting. So those are incredibly rare. And a while ago, we did find, did you ever hear about the Dead Sea Scrolls? Do you remember hearing about that on the news?
A little bit.
So those were actually found, well, they did some recent stories on them, but they were actually found in 1947.
Oh,
which
okay.
It's not very recent,
no.
But in the grand scheme of our history, it's relatively recent.
Yeah.
So the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, and they are the earliest, they're still copies, they're not the original manuscripts, but they're copies that were made of some of the, Isaiah is Old Testament? Yeah, so there were books like Isaiah that were written and copied in 900 AD. Those are really old. So they're very old copies, but they're still not those original autograph pieces. So there's actually something that I was curious to see. So do you think that the more we translate the Bible, so the more times we translate it from the original, like Greek and Hebrew, into English and Spanish and French, do you think that we lose anything?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because, like, I'm taking a Spanish class right now, and it's not very easy to find literal translations from Spanish to English and then vice versa. So, I mean, it makes sense that when you translate, you kind of use shortcut terms instead of, like, the actual word for word. So I would expect, you would lose some.
It seems a little scary, doesn't it?
That
who knows how many times this has been translated and what have we lost. But actually, this is an interesting fact. We actually don't lose any significant, we have not lost any significant parts from the original manuscripts to this one that you hold in your hands.
What about the different versions? Like, NIV, KJV.
Those are just different. They use kind of different languages. So they're all English, yes, but so like the King James is a much more formal and almost archaic.
Yeah.
That we don't really speak that way, so we don't understand it. So like this one is NIV, and it's words that we use, that we understand, that we know. So those are just kind of a phrasing thing more so than we don't lose any bits. If you were to look at a verse in the King James and look at it in this NIV, the same information would be there, it would just be said a little differently. But I think that's really crazy. We don't really get any further from the original text and from what Jesus is trying to tell us and what God is wanting us to know by letting more people understand it. So we also, like, there has never been enough that's changed that you can't be saved. Like, there's all the pertinent information, all the information we need to know to be saved is in there, no matter how many times we translate it or
that's important.
Or change it. It is very important. All right. So the only thing that you do need to know when you are looking at a new translation is, because there have been translations that have been made that have been bad. Like they didn't translate it well. They didn't take the time and the care to do it well. So if you do come across some new translation that people are really getting hyped up about, there are some things you can test to see if it's a valid translation. And so those things are accuracy, readability, and acceptability. So those things are important to look at when you're looking at a new translation. So do you have any questions after we've kind of talked about where our Bible comes from?
I mean, you've made some really good points here. So
it's kind of a lot of information.
It's a lot of information, but I did learn some stuff. I really did expect you to lose something when you translate it.
Yeah, I think that's something that makes it so much more powerful, because that means that there's no limit on who can have it and who can be saved, because of language, there's no limit. All right. So, and then we did talk about our ways that we got this Bible. So we have God reveals, inspired, man records, men copy, men compiles, and men translate, which we've talked more about. So I'm really excited for you to be joining our women's group.
Yeah.
And
it's going to be good to have some church friends.
Yeah. And you can really participate in our discussion now that you've been caught up and kind of where we're at.
I feel ready. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. I'll see you on Wednesday.
All right.